Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Laguna Beach, and on behalf of our Social Action Committee and advocates for cost-effective justice, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you here today. I would especially like to welcome and introduce our speaker, Assistant Sheriff Steve Kay. Before we start, let me provide you, our audience, with some useful context. The Orange County Sheriff Coroner Department is a very large, multifaceted law enforcement agency that is served by approximately 4,000 sworn and professional staff members and over 800 reserve personnel. Our speaker, Assistant Sheriff Steve Kay, is part of Sheriff Coroner Sandra Hutchinson's executive team. He is the Orange County Assistant Sheriff in charge of Custody Operations and Court Services Command. That means he oversees the 3 jail facilities in Orange County. He is in charge of all inmate services, including inmate reentry programs and all court operations. Personally, he has 28 years of service in the Orange County Sheriff's Department. He grew up in Hawaii and joined the Armed Services at age 17. And following that, went into service with the Orange County Sheriff's Department. He is married with how many kids?
3 children.
3 children. He is a motorcycle enthusiast, and he enjoys riding his motorcycle through our national parks. Orange County has one of the nation's largest jail systems. It processes more than 64,000 bookings every year and houses more than 6,000 inmates on any given day. This is obviously a tremendous challenge, and this morning we'll hear about the efforts to meet those challenges by our Orange County Sheriff's Department. Today, Steve will speak to us about jail conditions, mental health services, undocumented detainees, remediation, recidivism rates, and community reentry. We all want the same things as the Orange County Sheriff's Office. We want public safety and a criminal justice system that has integrity and functions to rehabilitate and help successfully reintegrate prisoners into society once their time has been served. There are some posters around the room that display some major problems with the federal government's sentencing mandates. California and Orange County have been able to offer effective alternatives when sentencing for drug offenses. Steve will be able to touch on those programs and more this morning. After Steve is done with each segment, question and answer period will follow. We have 3x5 cards for you to write down questions, and we will bring a microphone to you to ask your questions. Or you can hand in your 3x5 cards with your questions for response after each of the 3 segments. Please feel free to get up and get coffee or treats at any time. And with all that said, please everyone join me in giving a warm welcome to Assistant Sheriff Steve Kay.
Okay, can you hear me? Well, I had some casual conversations before we started this event, and I've got to tell you, Doug was listening. I don't remember saying all of the things that I said, but boy, she knows everything about me at this point. We need her as an investigator for that. But as she mentioned, I have been with the Orange County Sheriff's Department for 28 years, and for those of you that don't know how a Sheriff's Department works when it comes to the jails, all deputy sheriffs are trained as peace officers in the state of California, and the local police departments also attend our academy. And so all of our deputy sheriffs have the same training that all police officers do. However, there's one big difference. When police officers graduate the academy, they immediately transfer out to the streets and work as patrol officers. In the Orange County Sheriff's Department, when you graduate from the police academy, you then become a jail deputy. And eventually, as time goes on and we have openings in our patrol division, you will filter out to the patrol division. Although every time you promote to a higher rank, you then return to the jails and you work there as a supervisor. So I started my career as a jail deputy Worked there for about 5.5 years as a jail deputy, and then transferred to the patrol division, where I was a patrol officer, bicycle patrol officer, canine handler, and a few other assignments. I then promoted to sergeant and went back to the jails again as a supervisor. A couple of years after that, I worked in the patrol division again. I promoted to lieutenant, went back to the jails as a lieutenant. I've worked in labor relations, I've worked in internal affairs in a few other places, and then eventually, as I promoted up to commander, the sheriff asked me to come back to the jails again. So I have probably served more years in the Orange County jail system than most of our inmates. And so certainly it's a little better to be able to come and go as you wish, but nevertheless, I have spent well over 1/3 of my career serving in the Orange County jail system. And so I understand what it takes to run a jail from the very bottom level all the way to the top level. And that's not to say that I am necessarily the greatest person at doing those things, but I have done them to an extent that I feel comfortable in understanding the nuances and the issues that are out there. So when we talk about county jail, there's often a confusion between county jails and state prisons. When you talk about law violations, you basically have 3 types of violations. You have infractions, which are the things that you see often when you get pulled over and people get a ticket, or it may be a code violation in a city. Then you have misdemeanors. These are low-level crimes that you can, if convicted, serve up to 1 year in the county jail. And then you have felonies, and these are major crimes. And for a felony conviction, you are held in the county jail until your trial is complete. And if you're found guilty, you are then transferred to the state prison to serve your sentence. And so those are the 3 types of crimes that you generally see. So what happened most recently is, as some of you may know, California's prisons were horribly overcrowded. It resulted in some federal lawsuits. There were issues with medical care, overcrowding, unsafe conditions, and so the federal courts ordered the state of California to lower its population. Now, what they didn't want to do as a state was just open the floodgates and let everybody out of prison. So what they decided to do was make it a county problem. What the state said, in essence, was, yes, you used to house misdemeanors, but now we're going to ask you to house some felons as well. And they said the type of felons that we are going to now leave in your care are nonviolent, non-sexual charges, or non-serious felonies. Now, that's for the charge that they were arrested and convicted on. That doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't have that sort of past in their background. And so what that meant here in Orange County over the last 2.5 years is that our population has grown by 1,000 inmates. Now, those 1,000 inmates used to go to state prison when they were convicted of a felony. It's created quite an issue for us in our jail system. When we talk about nonviolent, non-sexual, non-serious felonies, generally what you're talking about are thefts and narcotic violations. And the thefts are usually tied in with the narcotic violations, people trying to support their drug habits, things of that nature. And so what we have found is an overwhelming attempt to smuggle drugs into our jails. We now have a population that has created a market, and so that has been a very big challenge for us. We've been trying to change a lot of the things that we're doing. We have a more sophisticated jail population now, and we have healthcare issues that we did not deal with before. An example of that would be hepatitis C. If we had someone convicted of a felony, we would send them to state prison. There are protocols for treating hepatitis C, and there are a series of medications and things that are administered. And the inmates just were not in our custody long enough to complete that process. So generally, anybody that had that ailment would go to state prison and begin their treatment protocols. Now, because we have felons in our custody and they stay longer, we actually give those protocols now. Treatment for one person is about $85,000. So when you talk about 1,000 people that are now in your custody, many of them intravenous drug users, you are going to find a population that is in need of that type of treatment, and it can be very costly. So the healthcare costs are really growing at an astronomical rate. We are adapting to those things, but it's a challenge. This is not something that was budgeted for and that there was a lot of thought put into. The real nexus to all of this was the state prisons had to lower their population numbers, and the counties were going to have to come up with solutions. And that's not to say that the state hasn't done their part in attempting to fund some of these things, but generally, as everyone knows, the funding is never enough. And so we're trying to come up with alternatives and ways to deal with our inmate population, how to manage and keep those folks in jail that need to be in jail, and at the same time come up with some alternatives to jail, because it's not a one-size-fits-all type of a system. And so before I get into a couple of the programs that we're looking to work towards, are there any questions from the audience on who we have in our jails, or any programs or thoughts about that?
Sorry.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
I think my first question is about what you started with, which was becoming a jail deputy.
Yes.
I'm curious what your thoughts are about how this mandate, that's how I understand it, is that it's a mandate, right?
It
It's
is.
not a choice. Impacts the deputy's investment in understanding and serving the clients while they're in custody.
I remember 28 years ago when I went to the jails to work. Prior to that, in the academy, the entire academy was about law enforcement, investigating crimes, report writing, and the very technical aspects of what it takes to be a law enforcement officer in the state of California. Now, that's great for all the police officers in the class and for those going directly to patrol, but we really didn't have a whole lot in the way of getting our folks ready to actually work in the jails. We had what we call the jail academy, but it was very brief. And what we realized was it is important for our deputy sheriffs to understand what it takes to be a law enforcement officer, but it's just as important for them to understand the laws, the rules, the regulations, and my expectations of them as they work in the jails. And so we now have a 2-week jail academy that is specific to all of the laws and the nuances of working in a jail, and then we put that deputy sheriff with a field training officer for an additional 6 weeks of training. When I first got to the jails, my very first day, I was introduced to my training officer. He said, "Hey, we're really busy. Go over there and do that, and I'll check in with you later." And so we've really evolved as a jail and as a department, and we've professionalized the requirements. The other thing that we've done is we've realized we don't need deputy sheriffs in every position in the jail. And so we have now created what we call correctional services assistants, who are non-sworn professional staff whose career is actually to work in the jails, not transition out like the deputies do. There are some folks that think we should completely switch over to that model. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, for the deputies union, our deputy sheriffs, again, are fully trained peace officers. So when we have major events, last night's earthquake, the Yorba Linda fires, the unrest in Anaheim, we have what we call a mobile field force. We will round up some of our jail deputies, put them into platoons, and then deploy them into Orange County's communities. And so they are the backup support and the backbone for public safety. So we will always maintain a level of deputy sheriffs in the jail, but we recognize we didn't have to keep the levels that we did before. And so you're seeing more professional staff in the jails. And I mentioned this to people in our department, and they're often shocked by it. We used to be about 75–80% sworn staff. We are now the minority on the department. So we are the Orange County Sheriff's Department, but there's a little asterisk there. Hope I answered your question.
I was just wondering if when the state dictated that the county had to accept these prisoners from state prisons, did the counties have any say-so in this? Was there any resistance from the counties? And if so, how did it all get resolved? In other words, how did you end up having to take these prisoners and I guess, expend county tax money?
Well, I'll tell you, there was huge resistance to the idea of doing this, as you can imagine. One of the fortunate things for Orange County was our jail population numbers had reached all-time lows. And so we actually had bed space in our jails, but there are several counties in California that had no bed space and were already under federal mandates to lower their population numbers and had no space to absorb some of these inmates. And so you can imagine the dismay on their part for this. And so collectively, the counties did everything they could to fight it. But ultimately, we have to remember it was the federal courts that were imposing this sanction on the states. So the state wasn't going to release these people on an island. They were going to send them back to our communities one way or another. So at a certain point, the counties realized, for lack of a better term, they want to negotiate terms of surrender. And in essence, that is what happened. The county said, let's work on the best of some limited options and see what we can do to minimize the public safety impact of this. And so that is how the solution eventually came. Now again, the dollars are never enough that come with this mandate from the state, and so there's a frustration level at times from the counties that this is an unfunded mandate that the state has put upon us. And I don't know that they could double the money that they're giving us and we would be satisfied. There are so many challenges with this population that we'll probably never get all of the dollars that we need, but I will say that Governor Brown had promised certain things to the counties as far as funding for this population, and we were very skeptical that we would get anywhere near what we've already received. And so I will give him credit for pushing those things through, certainly not enough, but he has kept his word on the things that he said he would do.
Thank you.
Is there some?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I wanted to know, can you tell us what is being done to prevent drug smuggling?
Well, there are a few different things that we're doing. We're tightening up the ability of people who come into our jail system, and when I say that I mean visitors and other people, because these things are coming in a lot of different ways. We recently gathered a group of experts to kind of tighten up some of our security measures in the facilities and add some additional staffing to places like the mailroom. A lot of our narcotics are mailed in, and you would think, a lot of people think that, you could pick out a thing of drugs very easily in the mail. It's not as easy as you think. Sometimes somebody will put just a drop of something on a stamp, and the inmate on the inside knows that this stamp is tainted. Now, imagine if you're working in the mailroom and you're handling this kind of stuff, you have the potential to touch this sort of thing. And so we have to actually protect our folks in the mailroom with gloves and breathing masks and those sorts of things. We have now narcotics detection dogs. One of the other ways, and one of the big ways where the big narcotics are coming in, and I don't want to get too graphic, but body cavities of people who violate probation or parole that are brought back into our jail. And so I am actually looking to get a body scanning machine for all new arrestees that's very similar to the body scanning machine that you see at the airport. And
What about outside vendors? What about the outside vendors that bring food and other goods into the jails? Is there ever any problem there?
we haven't had a lot of problems in that regard. On occasion it is. We've had things as, I'll give you an example. Deputies, when they do searches in the housing units and in the barracks, will wear latex gloves to protect themselves. And so when they're done with those searches, they'll throw those latex gloves in the trash. Every once in a while you'll see a latex glove laying on the floor next to a trash can or something. Well, the inmates figured out that these are the latex gloves that deputies use. So they actually had people on the outside hide some drugs in a latex glove and shoot it with a slingshot over the walls of our jail. And so when deputies see it, it just looks like trash. What we found through an informant was a significant amount of narcotics coming into our jail. Now, mind you, when there is a market for this in our jail facilities, there are more creative ways. You will see them come in through the courts. Somebody will show up at court with narcotics. The judge will then say they're to be taken into custody, and they try to smuggle them in. And so we are constantly catching it, but the efforts never stop. And so we have to remain vigilant on all fronts.
And I had one more question, and that is, what's the possibility of getting federal funding for health care?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. You've heard a lot about Obamacare, and here in Orange County and a lot of places it's not a very popular word, but I can tell you that there are opportunities within Obamacare to actually fund some of our treatment. And so in the Orange County Jail, in some counties, the sheriff actually runs the medical services for the jail. Here in Orange County, we have a memorandum of understanding with the healthcare agency. And so the Orange County Healthcare Agency actually runs all of our medical services in the jail. And so they are now working with social services. And what we are looking to do is enroll newly booked inmates into the system. And there are things that we have to pay for. If we have an inmate who is being treated inside of the county jail, that is funded through the healthcare agency's budget. However, if you have extensive medical needs and that requires you to now go out to a hospital, those sorts of things are covered under Obamacare, and there are some things for treatment after custody that we may be able to take advantage of as well. And so, ultimately it's tax dollars, whether it comes through the federal government or through the state or even through the county. And so a lot of people are opposed to those sorts of things. And so it's very difficult for us to navigate through, but it is our intent to take advantage of some of those resources, because if we don't pay for it through those resources, it will be paid for out of the county's general fund.
Let's move on to the second section, and there'll be plenty of time for questions as we go along. And I am asking you to use the mic because this is being recorded. We're actually videoing it, so it won't go on the tape. So wait until you get the mic in front of you, okay? Thanks. And if you have a question that you don't want to orally ask, please hand it to me, and I will hand it to Sheriff King. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the next phase, as I mentioned, this new population that we have, the law that kicked this whole thing off is Assembly Bill 109, and you will hear our population of inmates that are felons in our custody now referred to as AB 109 inmates. And there are actually 4 types of AB 109 inmates that we have in our custody. As I mentioned, with the new laws, the nonviolent, non-sexual, non-serious offenders are the population that used to go to state prison. They're now kept in the county jail. The second group of that population are people who are out on supervision, community supervision through the Orange County Probation Department now. Those are felons who used to be under the system of parole, but now they've been given to the Orange County Probation Department. And so if they are out in the community and they violate the terms of their supervision, they can be incarcerated for up to 6 months. And so we have that population that gets violated by the probation department and comes back in. Those are some of the folks who are attempting to smuggle drugs, and they know they're going to be picked up by their probation officers. They come in and report knowing they may have had what we refer to as a dirty drug test. And so they will attempt to smuggle in those drugs. We also have parole violators who are in our custody. Now, it used to be if you violated parole here in Orange County, the city of Anaheim's jail had a contract with the Department of Corrections, and so somebody that was violated on their terms of parole was booked into the Anaheim jail, and from there transported back to state prison to serve their parole violation. With the passage of AB 109, that stopped. We now also keep all parole violators, and so really the only people who are going back to state prison are either those who have a life sentence type of a crime or those that are going there under a new sentence. Almost all parole violators now stay in the county jail. And then the 4th type is what we call flash incarceration. The probation department and parole can take our inmate or their supervised releases, and without a court order or anything else, if they show up late for an appointment or they don't do the things that they have agreed to do while they're released, their probation or parole officer can incarcerate them for up to 10 days. And it is meant as a remedial measure to try to get folks back on track without necessarily putting them through the whole court process. And so we have what we refer to here in Orange County as SPOCs, State Prison Orange County, the new felons that are booked in and now kept in Orange County. You have those supervised by probation, those supervised by parole, and then the flash incarcerations. And so that's our population makeup. But what we don't want to do in Orange County is become what state prison became. And what we saw were triple bunking of inmates, not a whole lot in the way of programming. And in the county jails before AB 109, most inmates spent less than 30 days in the county jail. And so when you talk about that population, trying to create a program to prevent them from recidivating, I can't fix in 30 days what took 30 years to break. And so a lot of our programming was designed towards wood shop and things that kept people from being idle. And there was a segment that was also for those that did have longer sentences, an opportunity to do things like get a GED or enter into drug treatment programs or different behavioral therapy things. And Jeff, would you mind standing up? Jeff ran the Phoenix House, and among other things, and we have a lot of volunteers who volunteer their time through our inmate programs division and now through the Orange County Reentry Partnership to provide services, volunteering those opportunities. And Jeff has been deeply passionate about those things. He's been involved in those programs for years now. And so I don't know if you want to mention a little bit about what the Orange County Reentry Partnership is.
Good morning. My name is Jeff. We've been meeting in the private community as a group of nonprofit and volunteer organizations in the county. We've been in partnership with the Sheriff's Department, probation, the courts, the healthcare agency, and created, through the leadership of the Sheriff's Department, created a group called the Orange County Reentry Partnership, or OCREP. It's our cool acronym. But OCREP's been around for almost 10 years or so now. I've been the chairperson for it for the past 8 years. And what we've been doing is working together on developing some of the grants, trying to find some of the monies that Steve's been talking about from the government and so forth. One of the really cool things I will mention is that we had, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, we received a grant from the federal government, the National Institute on Corrections, which is kind of like the federal standards authority and whatnot on corrections in the country. We were a grantee, and we had a group of folks that made up of our partnership. We all went to Washington and got trained in what would be the kind of the most scientific evidence of how to do jail-based programs and how to do reentry or post-incarceration programs for folks that are reentering or formerly incarcerated, and how to connect all the dots between all these things. And so we all went to Washington, got trained in this model, and then we came back and we received all kinds of help and consultation from those folks. And so we put together a whole plan on how we would change the way we've been doing everything, from how the sheriff vets their people while they're in the jail and determines who should get what kind of a program. And we want to make sure that the right people that are in need in our jails get their way to the right program at the right time for themselves. And so my role in that process was to help coordinate all the volunteer folks and all the nonprofit groups and all the folks that are doing it in a non-civilian or in a non-official capacity, if you will, more the treatment providers and so forth. So we've been on this road together for quite some time, and the Sheriff's Department's really taken the lead quite a bit in helping us get to where we are today. So if you want any information online, it would be ocreentry.com. Really cool website. Of course, hosted by the Sheriff's Department, but ocreentry.com.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we're going with that. Jeff referred to a grant that Orange County got a few years ago. And again, as I mentioned previously, before AB 109, we had some housing space. And so what we created was an actual separate section of the jail where we took a group of inmates, put them together in what we refer to as a therapeutic community, and then they receive treatment, education, and other things collectively as a group, and then they start to plan their reentry back into the community, and then we hand them off into the community to their probation officers and track them through that process. It was a very successful program. Unfortunately, the county's budget, just like everybody else in the country, went down, and at the same time, Assembly Bill 109 came into effect, and so when the grant money dried up, our population numbers started to swell. We just didn't have a place to run this program. And so now that we've kind of settled into this new paradigm, we learned a lot from the program that Jeff had run, and we have some grand ambitions on how we are going to grow from that into something more meaningful. It's a bit of a challenge, but I'm going to lay out a little bit of what that program is, and it starts in what we call our screening phase. When a person is booked into the Orange County Jail, they are interviewed and classified on where they're going to be housed in our jail system. But one of the things that we do is we create a proxy score. It's a very brief interview, and we identify the base threat level of this person to recidivate in crime. If you have a low level of risk to recidivate, those are not the people that we want to target our programs to. The chances are jail is a scary place, they don't want to come back, and they're probably not going to, just based on the experience of going to jail. So if you invest your resources in them, you're probably wasting them, because those are the folks that just are not going to be coming back. And so what we want, well, let me back up. The others are those that are very, very highly to recidivate and are not open to programs and could care less about anything than being the best criminal that they can be again. So you have those extremes that certainly we want to do things and provide programming and services for those folks, but they aren't necessarily the folks that are going to be the most impacted. And so what we are looking for is from that mid-range to highly likely to recidivate, and we want to target our efforts at them. So once we've identified that base risk, after they've had some time to acclimate, get settled in, get the drugs out of their systems and other things that may be affecting them when they first get booked in, we then approach them with an opportunity to enter into our therapeutic community program. And the first thing that we do is we run a risk assessment on them. And that's a rather lengthy questionnaire, but it tells us what their base issues are. Is it anger management? Is it socialization skills? Is it drugs? And oftentimes drugs are just part of some of those other things. And so we find out what their criminogenic needs are. And from there, we put them in a cohort with other like-minded individuals, and then they will all program together. Then we reach into the institutional phase. And in the institutional phase, we put them in cognitive behavioral therapy groups. They get and this is all just very similar to kind of a school syllabus. Every day is planned out, but it includes things like GED instruction, substance abuse classes, employment readiness, mentoring for men, it may be Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, case management, conflict resolution, restorative justice services, meeting some of the victims and the people that they've harmed, family reunification services, and mental health services as well. And I should pause and mention, we have, between our inmate population and our ICE population, we have a total of about 7,000 people in our custody. About 2,000 people in our custody have mental health issues and are currently under treatment by our mental health units. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are seeing a counselor or getting therapy every single day, but we have an open case on 2,000 of our inmates. Of those 2,000, almost 800 of them are receiving psychotropic medications. We are the biggest mental health facility in the county. That may not be the best place, but quite frankly, it's the only place where some of these folks are getting treatment. And so when you add all of that together with drug problems, behavioral problems, you can see it's quite a challenge for us. And so in that institutional phase, we then work with the inmates to work on the specific issues and areas of concern that we identify through that risk assessment. We then move into what we call the structured reentry phase, and this is getting them ready for returning back into the community, and that is an individual case management. Each inmate that is in this program has a case manager, and they will then begin working on their specific needs. So, you know, for some folks, it's good to go home and be a part of their families. In other instances, it may be the absolute worst thing that you can do for them. And so we may need to find housing resources for them, as opposed to another person who might need to go into a rehab facility to continue on in the community with the treatment that we've already given them. And so each person's needs are unique, but also it's an opportunity to kind of manage them and also get them ready for what they can expect from their probation officers in the future. And so we may have probation officers in there that is going to be their case agent when they get out, and establishing that relationship before they get out. And then finally, we have the transition phase, and this is where we actually move them out into the community. Now, in the Sheriff's Department, we have a few things through our resource center: employment assistance, continuation of Alcoholics Anonymous, mentoring, case management. The probation department has a day reporting center, and they also have a core program that also involves ongoing resources. I attend their graduations. It's a pretty fantastic program. And then the healthcare agency has residential treatment, sober living homes, housing, and mental health treatment. And so collectively, we are trying to take a person from the day they come into the jail until the day they leave and focus on getting them connected to the resources they need. One of the things we find in rather short order, somebody that gets out of jail that has nowhere to go, has no plan, has no thought, usually drifts back to what they did before they got there. If we can bridge that gap and then carry it out to 60 days or more, the longer a person is out, the less likely they are to come back. And so it's an ambitious goal. We started doing this about 9 months ago. We've run 3 groups of male inmates through this program. So far, about 75% of them have been able to stay out of custody. A couple of them had some minor flash incarcerations. But again, this is not graduation from college. These are people who have serious issues, and so you can expect some recidivism out of them. There have been studies done in the past that show that even when you do all of these things, you are not going to reduce the overall recidivism rate to a grand scale. But as was mentioned, we book 65,000 people a year into our jail. If I can just lower it 10%, that's a pretty big number, and it's an awful lot of tax dollars that we can save. And so we refer to this program that we are getting up and running as our Lasting Change program. With the success that we've had in the pilot project of it so far, and we've been doing that at our James Music facility in Irvine, we are now looking to expand it to the Theo Lacey facility and to the Central Jail Complex in Santa Ana, and also begin a women's program. That is something that we have not done yet. We've done some things with our female inmate population. The good thing, if you will, is women are a lot less likely to recidivate than men. That's not to say that they don't, but when you talk about the whole population, a lot of times the women that are in our custody are usually victims of other types of abuse and wind up in the situations that they are. So the key to getting them not to recidivate is not necessarily trying to stop behaviors, but try to find them resources and the ability to get out from under the things that are burdening them. And so each situation is unique. We have a lot of other programs that we run in the jail aside from this, but the Lasting Change model is something that we believe, if we can do on a grander scale, can have a big impact. Now, finding space to do that is not an easy thing when you're completely full. So that is our challenge in Orange County right now. We did apply for a couple of different grants from the state. We received through AB 900, $100 million to expand the James Music facility. We are about 95% done with the design of that first phase. It's going to be probably about 3 years before that, late 2017, before we get a chance to open that facility. But it is going to have state-of-the-art medical, dental, and counseling rooms and all of those sorts of things just in that facility, and that's about a 512-bed facility. And then a few months ago, we were successful with the state for another $80 million. And what I sold the state on is that we are going to build a Lasting Change facility, not just what we're doing now is borrowing rooms and places to try to build this thing, but we are actually going to build a facility that is designed to reduce recidivism. And so the housing units are actually going to have healthcare offices in the jail, probation offices in the jail, social services offices in the jails. There will be classrooms, there will be counseling rooms, and a host of other things that we hope to bring into that facility. And so the grant only gives us the money to build the facility. We will ultimately have to come up with the money to staff it and to run it. Now there's a couple of ways we can do that. One is that we hope to get more grant money. The other is we may just close some other facilities as we open this and shift some of our resources over. And so, as Jeff mentioned, volunteers are vital to our system. Between our religious and private volunteers, we have about 1,000 volunteers that work in our jail system. It's a pretty robust group. It's challenging. And again, even after we do all of this, we have to make sure that we're doing it smart, we're doing it the right way. So we've partnered with UCI and a few others who are going to study what we do to see what's successful and what's not. San Diego County is running a similar program. I was just in Seattle, Washington at Microsoft. They are building some new databases that we can use to study and analyze what's working and what's not working. San Diego is going to pilot it. They actually just started this week building that database, and by September they should be up and running. And so we hope to model our system after that. We're not going to wait to start our programs, but to get some analysis of it is going to be vital, because there are a lot of times where you head down a path where in your mind you think this is going to be a really great program, we're going to have great success, and it just doesn't work. And so sometimes it just requires modification of those programs. Other times it means we just shut it down and go in a different direction. And so, you know, we get a lot of questions about you should run this program or you should run that program, and we really have to look at it. We have limited resources. What's going to work is vital to us to make sure that in the long term, and keeping in mind, we won't know the results of some of these programs for 4 or 5 years. We can certainly show short-term gains, but if you want to know what really works, you've got to look at folks that you've put through these programs 4 or 5 years down the road to know if you've really impacted their lives. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Don't forget the microphone.
Thank you. As an experienced social worker, what you're describing is really exciting to hear. So I think my question is really more geared towards what seems to be a root challenge within even the larger criminal justice system. So I think in our history in this country, we oftentimes feel most comfortable with a punitive approach, which then informs attitudes and beliefs. So I think it ties back into my original question, which is when you have individuals, albeit well-intentioned individuals, working as jail deputies, being active case managers with the clients, how do you feel, and I'm also curious if it's okay with you what Jeff thinks about this, attitudes and beliefs that potentially punitive eye for an eye contributes to, again, investment in staff, at really understanding why an individual is actually making choices to get them in jail, what's underlying their substance abuse issues, looking at their trauma history, what informs people's desire to behave in this way, and how that potentially affects even one's accurate assessment of a client. What do they need? What's going on for them? What's going to be helpful while they're actually incarcerated? What's going to be helpful? So that's more so, it's attitude and belief, and how that then informs engagement.
Well, let me start by saying, when it comes to these assessments and these programs, they're not run by the deputies. We actually have professional staff that will be running all of these programs. As I mentioned before, we're starting to separate what our deputies do and what our professional staff does. The role of a deputy sheriff in the jail is not to run a program like this. They don't have the expertise, the professionalism to do it. That's not to say that they can't partner in that effort, but we need people that really understand what those issues are. And so our deputies are primarily a security measurement, and certainly depending on which jail and which particular housing unit, they may have a completely hands-off approach. We have some programs where our classes are done and there are no security personnel in there at all. And then you talk about some of our other places and we may have some people in there. Now that said, I'll tell you, one of the things I have found with the generation of deputies that we're hiring now, and I think you hear this sometimes completely unrelated to the sheriff's department, the generation of young adults that are coming into the workforce now are much more accepting of diversity and understanding than folks were when I came into the department and before me. And so I think you're seeing a paradigm shift. Now, you have to remember, when we're talking about a jail environment, particularly with the amount of people that we have in custody, there are a lot of violent folks in jail, there are a lot of scheming people in jail, and so you have to have a certain mentality to work in a place like that. And when you walk in that door, if you don't have a certain level of command presence, people will pick up on it immediately and begin to manipulate you. And so the challenge sometimes, especially for our younger workforce, is to know where that line is between being confident and capable and being grumpy and abusive. And so sometimes young guys have to learn how to adapt to that. And keeping in mind, the people that we hire have no experience in that sort of a background. Some people do. They come from socioeconomic backgrounds where they may have seen some of that on the street. But a good portion of our folks are college educated, have been in an environment that is completely different. And so the first time I walked in a jail and I was surrounded by 500 inmates, there were 5 of us in there. We had no weapons whatsoever. I had handcuffs and a mini-mag flashlight, and I am amongst 500 inmates, and a fight broke out. And it was a racial fight between two inmates. We attempted to pull them apart. The one who was getting the better of the other, when we pulled him off, the rest of the inmates who he was housed with then attacked us. Now there's 5 of us in there waiting for help to come, so the only thing we could do is run to the corner of the mess hall, fight him off until help got there with nothing but our hands. And so in that type of environment, the smallest thing can trigger the biggest event. And so balancing that with showing care and compassion is sometimes a very tricky business. And so when we talk about these sorts of programs, we are looking to bring people in who don't have to take on the role of being the security member of that. Now that said, the greater challenge as we try to move into these things, and Jeff and I talked about this briefly, elected officials have to vote on the things that we fund. And here in Orange County, we have a reputation for being hard on crime. And so when you talk about these things, I've heard comments people have thrown at me that these are hug-a-thug programs. And you know, it's a funny slogan, but the truth of the matter is, it is a paradigm shift for people that look at crime and they want us to, you know, lock them up and throw away the key. Well, the state prison system did that. How did that work out? Not quite so well. So when they talk to me about being hard on crime, I talk to them about being smart on crime. And so that's the answer to this. But it's an uphill battle. One of the things we recently attempted to do, we currently have an electronic monitoring program for our misdemeanor inmates. And so those that are well behaved on the back end of their sentences, that have got their GED or done some other things, we'll put them out on electronic monitoring where they're on home confinement. We wanted to do that with some of our AB 109 inmates. And one of the comments that was made, and I really don't want to attack any elected officials, so I'm going to be very careful how I say this. But one of the comments when we brought this up, it comes with a set of rules, and one of those is that they may be allowed to go to work. And the comment that was made to the sheriff and I was, I don't want them going to work. I want them paying their punishment for their crime. And the sheriff's response was, if they lose their job, what do you think they're going to do after they've now served the sentence that you want them to serve? I would rather have them go to work and be productive. It's the most likely thing to keep them from recidivating. I see a lot of people nodding their heads, yes. It seems like the right thing to do, but try getting a politician to vote for that. It is particularly in an election year. And so we were unsuccessful in getting that program started. But we're not going to give up. We'll be back. But again, that is the challenge that we have. So when you talk about the mentality to try to get these things done, it doesn't stop at the gates of the jail. It is a community issue. It is a political issue. And getting that support, we're starting to see that change, but it's not quite there yet. So why don't I take some questions on the programs or anything else?
Hi, thank you. My question kind of follows that. Does the Sheriff's Department have a program to try to work with the community in terms of helping inmates re-enter the job force and work with employers to be accepting of former inmates?
Yes, as a matter of fact, on Tuesday, I am meeting with Bill Habermel. He is the former superintendent of education, and he's now moved on to the private sector, and he happened to get a grant for a new program, and he has some money available to him, so he's my new best friend. But that program is to not just get GEDs for inmates, but it is actually to get high school diplomas for them. And on the back end of that, they also have some money available to reach out to private employers and to incentivize them into hiring some of these folks. And so that's one effort. We're working with a few of the larger companies right now, IBM and a couple of others, to try to do some of those things as well. And we have a department chaplain, his name is Sandy Otsuji, and he has not been involved in our inmate reentry programs before. He's primarily a representative of the department that we bring to crime scenes and other things when there are traumatic things that happen. Well, he heard about our programs. He's now engaged us for about the last 9 months, and he is creating a public-private partnership with churches and public employers, and we're going to put a whole marketing campaign together to try to reach out to some of those businesses. Here's the challenge of that. a lot of times we hear from companies and from people who in theory want to support this, and then what happens is the real world kicks in, and that person shows up in the workforce, and it is not a Hallmark movie. You are going to have people with tattoos on their necks, and they come from backgrounds that they don't understand how to behave well or appropriately in certain situations, and so it tends to lose steam in some places, and some employers are not necessarily as happy with what that represents when their customers come in. And so they think they want to help, and then when they see the realities of the world, they tend to filter out. And so we have to find committed partners. It's not an easy thing to start, and it's not an easy thing to sustain, but it is absolutely something we're working on.
I've got a question here.
In the back.
Yes, thank you, Sheriff, for your comments. I'm really excited to hear about some of the things that are changing. And my name's Tina Marie, and I'm with an organization that Jeff knows called Rowan & Schuster, and we do legal advocacy and life coaching to assist people who have barriers to employment. And I work both in Orange County and the Los Angeles area as far as the people we work with. And a lot of what you're sharing, I'm seeing some transition going on also in Los Angeles County. And what I wanted to touch on was what you're referring to with the work barriers. And where I think what you're bringing up is a very key point, is that one of the, some of the experiences we've had is that employers do want to do something, but there needs to be bridges. And one of the things that Jeff and I have chatted about in the past, and what I want to really kind of hit on with their mentoring program, is really allowing that to take place. The mentoring of having someone that's kind of a coach, assisting that person, especially through the interview process and the staying on the job process. Maybe having something similar to what we're trying to implement right now in LA under parole is for helping the person have almost like a big brother connection. And possibly also using some of our lifers who are coming out now on parole, who are amazing people, and having them also assist in the mentoring process. Some of the guys and gals that are having to go back in and out because they haven't learned some of the changes that need to be made. So I guess my question back to you is, maybe there's some opportunities that we can offer too. And also, if you think the community aspect of making sure that the community understands and supporting that process and having more advocacy going on in the community, would that be also a service, I guess, to the Sheriff's Department?
It would, and we actually, I gave a tour a few weeks ago to one of the members of the Board of Supervisors, and we actually walked into a class where they were teaching people how to interview, actually going through role playing and dressing them up in a shirt and tie, and that's a very awkward thing the first time people do it. As was mentioned, I grew up in Hawaii. We don't wear shirts and ties. When I first applied to the Sheriff's Department, I had to go buy a tie. It's just not something that some people are comfortable with, and certainly knowing that you're going to be asked some hard questions, how to respond to those, how not to offend people, all of those things are life skills that these people do not have. And it goes beyond that. How do you apply to rent an apartment? How do you get a driver's license? All of those very base skills that a lot of people take for granted, these folks have never had to do before. And so just getting them comfortable with those things is a challenge. And so we do have some of that in place. Certainly not as robust as we want it, and we would be willing to take advantage of those opportunities. Now, as I talk about this program, I've been doing this with our existing resources, and they are just stretched very thin. And so we're actually getting close to putting out a recruitment for what we refer to as an administrative manager to run that program. And I say that because Jeff is here, and I'm certainly hopeful that he's interested in taking on that role. But it would in essence be the person who has the vision of this and then works to implement it. And certainly, we wouldn't just compartmentalize that person and just say, go do it, and we move on to other things. We would, at a higher level, be involved in it as well. But we don't currently have all of the resources in place to really run this as an umbrella program yet. And there are a lot of other challenges that the county and that the department is facing. And so to some degree, I have to wait my turn in line to get some of the things that I want and the money for that. And so that's the direction we're headed. everybody wants it by this summer. It's going to take us time to build this. It's not something that happens overnight, but I look back to where we were 2 or 3 years ago and where we are today, and so I see progress, but again, it's not as quick and as complete as we would like.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming. I think we're a small but hopefully mighty group here. I have an overall question. I've talked to too many people who think that in the prison system is just full of nonviolent users and people not a threat to society should be out. And the second question I have seems to go the other direction, that the private prison system, you may want to comment or not on this, the private system, prison system seems to be proliferating more sentences and more people, and again, a lot of people are afraid of that. I don't know what the internet has to do with it, but it's probably some of the urban legends.
You know, I often get comments from people who say, you know, if they legalized marijuana, you would empty your jails. I haven't seen anybody in the custody of my jail who was caught with, you know, personal use marijuana or that sort of thing. We just don't have the space for those kind of folks. Our minimum security James Music facility is where we house people who may have multiple drug violations and those sorts of things. But when you talk about those low-level, non-violent, never been in trouble types of folks, I currently run what we call a community work program. So we have people who are convicted to do time in the Orange County jail system, and we put them on work crews in the community, and they may work at Orange County parks, they may work at the harbor. I'm currently working with a fire authority to get a wash crew to actually wash and shine fire trucks, and they live at home and they report to a work site. I have close to 650 people serving their sentences that way. So when you talk about those nonviolent folks, those are the people that we're not even keeping in our jail system. And so when we kind of look at that as an umbrella program, a step down from that is the electronic monitoring. And so some people need monitoring the entire time that they're not in our jail. We have about 100 people that we have out, misdemeanors that we have out on electronic monitoring. Now it gets a little bit tricky because when we put people out on these programs, they have to have a house to live in. And the family members that are there have to be willing to take them in, and they have to be willing to allow us in to make sure that they're maintaining the terms that we put them out. But a large part of our population is actually out of custody, not in custody, and those are the people that everyone says we should be putting out and don't know that we already are. But when it comes to private prisons, there's not an incentive at the county level to try to stock private prisons. Now that's not to say that these private prisons don't approach some of our state lawmakers and certainly try to get contacts. As soon as AB 109 hit, I started fielding phone calls from some of these folks. If we build a private prison, will you send some of your inmates to our private prison? The answer was no. And certainly we want to avoid doing that wherever we can. We want to resolve our problems here in the community. Prison is not the answer to everything. Now, if we reach a point where we've hit saturation and the numbers continue to grow, we do have to start looking at some alternatives. But I think most counties are finding that the private prisons are not the solution. And I'll tell you, when it comes to the state level and state prison level, the union that has the biggest effect on our state lawmakers are the state prison guards. They want nothing to do with private prisons because it diminishes their power. And so, are there people that use the private prisons? Yes. Is it a fix-all solution? No. And quite frankly, here in Orange County, we don't see it as a solution at all.
Do you want to go to your next segment, or would you like to take some more questions?
Wait,
I see a
We're
lot of
going to have
hands.
more questions, but
I just want one to do mine. Remember to tell us what we can do.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've got that on my list too.
All right.
Would you like to, I didn't hear it asked.
I'll take a couple more questions,
Okay.
and then I'll get on to the last phase of what I'm hoping to accomplish.
Okay.
Hi. You've been great, and I've really enjoyed what you've had to say so far. I was curious about, when you talked about the 100 million and then the 80 million and the new design, is some of that going to include, because now that you have the state prisoners that are there for longer periods of time and other kinds, I think reentry back into society, the ties with family, although you mentioned that it's not always beneficial, but the way that, like the visiting rooms, instead of through glass, so that if it's a mother, let's say, who's incarcerated, so she can actually touch and hold the kids, those kinds of being able to stay in contact with families, so
Yes.
that it's not just through a phone. And I was wondering if that new design and the visiting room, the longer.
Yes, in some of those housing units, we do actually foresee doing that. Now, there's a few things that we're up against. One is law. We're not allowed to bring juveniles into adult facilities. And so we have to design it so that we can skirt that law a little bit and allow them into certain parts of the facility that the law may allow for. And so that's part of our design phase as well. Currently at the James Music Facility, we actually do have face-to-face visits. Now, there's no physical contact in those. What we did set up when AB 109 first came into effect, the juvenile court judge at the time was Judge Hutching, and I met with him, and there's a program in the state prisons where you have children who are wards of the county are actually taken, and a lot of people don't know this, they're taken on buses and they go on a circuit through the state prisons, and social workers will bring them for visitations with their children. And so with the advent of AB 109, we now had some of those people, and that is a mandate that we have to be able to provide that service. So I met with social services, I met with a few other agencies, and at the James Music Facility, we actually set up an area where we had couches and books and playthings, and we said we can do it on Tuesdays in this one area. And then we were told, well, Tuesday's not a good day. Well, what is a good day? So they said Thursday. So we modified everything in the jail so we had a place to do this, and nobody came. And we did it again, and nobody came. And then finally we had an inmate who said he was interested in doing this. And so we set up, one of the requirements was before he was allowed to do this, he had to attend and complete a parenting class. About halfway through, he decided he didn't want to do that. And so they say if you build it, they'll come. We built it and nobody came. And it was very disappointing. But that said, we do see more opportunity to do it. And we couldn't do it in Santa Ana. The way our buildings are structured there, the law did not allow us to have programs like that. And at the security levels that we have in those facilities, it became problematic. And the same thing at the Theo Lacey jail. So we're actually building this jail with those sorts of things in mind, where we actually have secured rooms, but they'll be built to allow for those sorts of things in there. Unfortunately, again, we're talking late 2017, early 2018 before some of these things start to come online. So it is a challenge. We've tried to do what we can with it. There hasn't been a whole lot of support on that. I was actually a little disappointed after all the effort we had put into it. But it's not something that we've given up on. It's just something that's a challenge.
Thank you so much for your informative talk so far. I wondered if you could speak to the undocumented prisoners and parolees question.
We have a couple of programs in the Orange County Jail. One is what we refer to as 287G. And in that program, we screen everyone that comes into our jail for their immigration status. Now, these are what we hear in the media oftentimes is, you have somebody of Latin American descent that is pushing a cart and they don't have a license to do that, and they're brought into our jail, and then we send them off to their country of origin. We don't have anybody like that in our jail. We won't accept people like that in our jail because we don't have room for them. And so generally, what we will do is we will screen folks. If there is a question about their immigration, we then notify immigration, and it is up to them to place a hold. We do not place a hold on the inmates. We just flag them, and immigration will then review their case. If immigration decides that they want to hold them, then there's an evaluation that's done on whether or not they meet certain criteria to be held in the custody of the Sheriff's Department. It's referred to as the Trust Act, and there were a lot of people that thought that would eliminate a majority of the folks that we have in our custody from being held by ICE. That has not turned out to be the case. We may get 5 or 10 people in a month that previously would have been held, and ICE would pick them up, and now we just release. And so it didn't change a whole lot. There was, I think, a misperception about who we were holding, and that this would solve that. The truth of the matter was most of those folks never even made it into our jail. Now, we have a daily bed rate for immigration detainees that are held in our custody. It's $118 a day. About $24 of that $18 goes to the healthcare agency to provide healthcare for folks that are being held by immigration. But what happens is when immigration picks up any of our former inmates and takes them into custody, they don't just transition them over and start paying us for them. They actually take them away from our facilities. We may never see them again. So there's no incentive on our part. I've heard people say that we're stocking the pond, we're putting holds on people, moving them over, and then billing the federal government for them. Those folks are taken away, and in LA, they are processed through. They may wind up, that's where a lot of folks are being moved out to Adelanto. There are private prisons out there that have contracts with immigration. So a whole lot of them are being brought out there, but they are also bringing a lot of them from other places, and then we rent bed space to immigration. And we have a contract with them to hold up to 838 is the most beds that we would be made available to them. Now, we've never reached that number. We're currently at about 650 detainees. And so at the conclusion of their immigration hearings and whatever determination is made, we don't release them onto the street. We don't send them to their country of origin. ICE comes and picks them up, takes them back, and then does whatever processing they need to do. And so we have a good portion of our ICE detainees are housed at the James A. Music Facility, and a lot of people think it is strictly people from Mexico and Latin America. They are from all over the world. In fact, at the James Music Facility, they grouped up by countries and actually had what they refer to as World Cup soccer, and the different countries played each other. And we're talking Somalia, Romania, the Czech Republic, and all over the world. And so it's a pretty diverse community, and they do not live under the same rules that our inmates live under. They get significantly more access to things, up to and including computers. Okay. Why don't I move on to phase 3? And this is possibly where some of you can have some impact. We currently have about half of our population is unsentenced, meaning they were arrested and charged with a crime, and they are now in our custody. So 50% of all of our inmates are people who have not been convicted of the crime that they are facing. When you talk about creating bed space and opportunities to do other things, when we evaluate, do we really need to have all of these pre-trial inmates in our custody? Now, you have a bail system, and it's a financial system, so if you have the means to get out as a pre-trial inmate, it may not necessarily mean that you're any less of a public safety risk. So, for instance, if you're a major drug dealer and you have financial resources, you can bail out. If you are a low-level street dealer, you may not have the same financial resources. Who's the bigger threat? You know, certainly both of them pose a public safety risk, but bail is not necessarily keeping people in based on their public safety threat. And so what you're starting to see in California is a new way of looking at our pretrial population. And one of those things is to do a risk assessment of these folks for a couple of things. One, are they a public safety threat? Two, are they likely to show up for their court appearance date? And three, is there any threat to witnesses or other people that may be involved in the case? And so if you evaluate them and you determine that they are not a threat in either of those three categories, then really we've guaranteed they'll show up to court and they're not a danger, so why should we have them in our custody? So as you're starting to see this unfold in the state, this is something that hasn't caught on in Orange County yet. As you can imagine, district attorneys, prosecutors, they want these folks to get through the justice system. They want the conviction. Now, they believe they've committed these crimes, so they would not have charged them with it. But if we put people in their homes, if we put them back into the community, are they less likely or more likely to plead guilty as opposed to being locked up in jail and having an incentive to just want to put it behind them? And so that could potentially clog up the court system if everybody wants to draw out their court cases and tax the resources. So there's a little bit of a worry that if we go to a system like this, the court system will just shut down because you just can't process that many people through. But what we're seeing is that isn't happening. In Washington State, they've gone to a risk assessment rather than a bail model. And now they're a different makeup than we are here, but they were 97% successful with the pretrial risk assessment in getting people to court and not creating public safety issues. Now, when you talk about the population we have here in Orange County, I just saw something in the Orange County Register yesterday that says that we have one of the biggest populations as a county in the nation. I think we're 6th in the nation when it comes to counties. So it's a little harder for us to find people who want to disappear, as opposed to Washington State, where, you know, some of these smaller towns, if you don't show up, we're going to know where you're at. And so I don't pretend to say that we're going to have a 97% success rate, but there is an opportunity to look at our pretrial population and to do some of those assessments that I mentioned in some of the programs that we're talking about. So if we do that assessment that talks about what their needs are, what their public safety threat level is, and then we share that information with the public defender, the district attorney, the court, and probation, at the time that that person comes to arraignment, or sometime early on in trial, they may come to agreement on what the best course of action for that person is. And it may be to go directly into treatment services. It may be that they have to come to jail. There's a lot of different avenues that they can go down. But without assessing that person's individual needs, the only thing the court knows is their criminal background and what they're currently being charged with. And when you try to evaluate how to reduce recidivism through that lens alone, you're going to come up short. And so it's a shift in mentality. We see it starting to change throughout California. I'm starting to get a little bit of support out of the district attorney's office and some of the others. Certainly the public defender is on board with it. But again, it's not something that is intuitive to people in the law enforcement world. And so those paradigms are changing slowly. And so we hope to have a pretrial program in place that might circumvent people even coming into the jail system or staying for any length of time. And when you talk about 50% of our population being pre-trial, there's an opportunity to create more bed space and still meet the public's goals of making sure that these folks go to court and certainly the justice system to work. And so our politicians hearing about things like that, encouraging them to open their mind to alternatives to incarceration will really allow us an opportunity to focus on the folks that are in our custody. And right now, with 7,000 people in our custody and very limited resources, and then having to find places that we can stand up some of our programs, it's quite a challenge. And so I would encourage you to talk to your elected officials and to tell them to consider some of these things. Sheriff Hutching is certainly out there talking about them. You know, during an election year, June is election season in November. A lot of times people aren't too interested in hearing those things. They may even believe in them, but they don't want to put their neck out on the line. And so I would encourage you to reach out to your community leaders and to get them to start thinking in a different paradigm. And again, also, as Jeff mentioned, through the Orange County Reentry Partnership and some other opportunities to volunteer, we would look for that as well from the community. And so with that, happy to answer any questions.
I'd like to ask something regarding these assessment programs that you mentioned a couple of times that you do. Who does those assessments?
There are actually companies out there that now specialize in doing them, and they've got, you name it, all sorts of data analysts and psychologists and people that will put them together. And that's actually been part of our challenge because there are so many of them out there. There are several that are proven. But what you'll hear, and this is a term that you're going to hear a lot, is evidence-based practices. And they want to see scientific proof that these risk assessments are being properly done to evaluate these people. And what I have found is there is no singular risk assessment that is done out there. Now, the first time that our district attorney saw a risk assessment, it lowered a person's risk assessment if they lived at home with their parents. And he saw that and went, really, that guy's not a public safety threat because he lives with mom and dad. I find that hard to believe. It seems counterintuitive, but there is some science behind that. And so some people see these risk assessments as nothing more than hocus pocus, and they just don't believe in it. And that has been a bit of a challenge. And so we currently use what we call a Wisconsin risk assessment, is what the probation department uses. There's another one that San Diego is working with right now that through a company called Compass. And it's a very detailed assessment. Part of our challenge is it takes sometimes a couple of hours to go through those assessments. And when you have, a few thousand people to run through that, it can be very labor intensive. But San Diego has modified the Compass risk assessment. They've included some of their own internal requirements. We are looking at what they are doing. We actually tested a model of screening against what we currently do for our programming, and we found that actually, even though ours wasn't designed with that goal in mind, it actually came fairly close. But convincing the courts and convincing the district attorney and several other public safety partners, we are all going to have to be on the same risk assessment. We can't have probation using one, the sheriff's department using another one, and the DA relying on another. And so over the past couple of months and actually into April, there are some working groups that are now attending some conferences. One of my lieutenants who runs these programs, as far as risk assessments go, is actually going to be attending and reporting back to me. But when we first started to do that, you didn't see the judges and you did not see the DA's office attending these things. They're starting to show up. So it's a little difficult to get people on board with it. Again, you hear the hug a thug thing, but we're slowly changing minds.
Generally, how long does it take for a case to come to trial?
It depends on the case. Our more violent crimes obviously take a lot more time. A lot of cases of people that we are looking at to put through these programs, when you talk about narcotics cases and a lot of those things, they're adjudicated fairly quickly. And when I say fairly quickly, you have to take in mind that the wheels of justice turn slowly. And so we have people that are in our custody for 6 months to 3 years before they're ever convicted of a crime. Now, a lot of those folks probably wouldn't make it through our risk assessment and get put out anyway, but there are a lot of people that, you know, they may only spend a week or two in our custody before they're sentenced and given credit for time served, and then moved out into the community. But why wait for that? You know, that opens up more beds for us. But a lot of folks actually make it through the system pretty quickly, and it's usually through plea bargaining. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, a real quick question. How does Orange County's recidivism rates compare to other counties and California state for similar crime?
I'll tell you, the first part of that question is the word recidivism. How do you define recidivism? And you cannot get anyone in this state to agree on what recidivism is. So if a guy comes in for bank robbery and he goes out on supervised release and he comes back for a DUI, is he a recidivist? He didn't commit the same crime, so he's not recidivating over the same issues. Now, for me in the sheriff's department, if you come back to jail for any reason, you're a recidivist. You're back in and you have an impact on my operation. So I define it as anyone that returns to custody, even if it's just because they missed a couple of appointments with their probation officer and they're flash incarcerating them. To me, that is recidivism. Now, when you talk to the probation department, they see flash incarceration as behavioral modification, not recommitting or reoffending, and so they don't want to count those. You may talk to parole, they have people they don't want to count, and so when you start talking about recidivism, we can't all collectively agree on what it is as a county or even as a state. And so when we start to compare ourselves to other counties and they say their recidivism rate is low, they may not be counting half of the people that are coming back to their jail. And so it's difficult to compare. What I can tell you is Steve Sedman is Orange County's probation chief, and he compares their supervised release folks, the felons, to what the state prison was, and they believe they are more successful than the state. Now, I'll tell you, there were a lot of felons who left state prison that were non-violent, non-sexual, non-serious, that didn't go on parole. They wound up under probation and didn't like it because instead of reporting once a month or once every 6 weeks, they had to report once a week. And so Orange County's been a little more diligent than state parole has in maintaining oversight. And they believe that, along with some of the programs that they are running, are helping to run those numbers a little bit lower. But when you talk about comparing us, it's a very difficult thing to define. Back.
I had another question regarding the drug court. Would there be a possibility, have we explored the thought of expanding drug court as part of the way to maybe lower some of those unsentenced folks?
Yeah, we actually have several different, what we refer to as community courts in Orange County. You have drug court, veterans court, homeless court, DUI court. Here's where it gets tricky with a lot of those. The state funds the court system, not the county. Now, every county gets money from the state to run their courts. There isn't enough money for these community courts, so the presiding judges came to the county and said, we want you to fund these programs, these community courts, the DUI courts and the drug courts. And even though that's not your role, county government, to pay, the benefit for you is you have less people in jail and you have less people in the justice system. And so the county has paid for many of those courts. Unfortunately, you may have heard of a recent fight over vehicle licensing fees between the county and the state. The state raided Orange County for $150 million. And the county held out on that money, refused to give it to the state. It went to the courts, and the state prevailed over the county. And so there's still a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes to try to recapture that money. But there simply is no money on our end to give to the courts. Just in the sheriff's department alone, in the upcoming fiscal year, and our year runs from July through June, we're $40 million short, and we're asking the county to fill that hole. Now, they've just lost $150 million, and they're not in a mood to give us that money. So there just aren't the resources to expand those courts. I do believe in them, and they are highly successful, but there just simply aren't enough resources, and the state is now cutting back on court services. You're starting to see in the Orange County courts, they're closing down services in some of the outlying courts, and then unfortunately, especially for folks in South County, they're having to come north to get some of the services because they simply don't have the money. So it's unfortunate, but money is at the root of all of this.
I can definitely say thank you. I'm certainly comforted by you being in the role that you are, and thank you for the time you spent with us today and how thorough you have been. So I think my question is more specific. How can we support you and what you currently are doing? More specifically, who locally do you want us individually and collectively to reach out to? What are some of the things you want us to focus on as far as promoting this paradigm shift? And how? What medium? Email, sitting in front of their office, phone calls? You know, what more specifically have you seen as most effective?
I have to be very careful with these things. I didn't reach the rank of assistant sheriff by, bringing pitchforks and torches onto the doors of our elected leaders. And let me tell you, it is a very difficult place to navigate. I would say I wouldn't ask you to bang down the doors and demand things through protest and whatnot. But I do think through your city council members and directly through the Orange County Board of Supervisors to encourage them to promote these sorts of things. Also, the district attorney's office. Now, there's an election in June for DA. The DA is running unelected. He is starting to come around to this, but I don't know that they know there's community support for these sorts of things. When you read editorials and other comments that people write, you will see a lot of people with that law and order, throw away the key kind of mentality. And so they don't hear that voice. That's really what we need them to hear. So letter writing to them, organizations that you're affiliated with that asks them what they are doing and how they are supporting some of these changes, pointing out to them what some of the other counties do. If there's one thing that most elected leaders hate is when other counties are beating them to some of these changes. And so, I just came from a conference with San Diego, LA, Riverside, and San Bernardino. And there are some things that we are doing better than they are, and there are some things that they're doing better than we are. And so we get a little competitive with each other. But that doesn't just stop at the sheriff's department. You will see those things. So reaching out to the Board of Supervisors, we also have what the state required us to do when AB 109 went into effect. They said, hey, we're going to give you this money, but you have to create a community corrections partnership. And that community corrections partnership is made up of the probation department, who chairs the committee, the DA, the public defender, there's a member of the Board of Supervisors there, a representative from the presiding judge, and social services and the healthcare agency. And so you have this collective group. They have to agree on how they're going to disseminate this money, because it doesn't all come to the sheriff's department. Certainly we're the biggest user of that funding, but it goes to the healthcare agency and social services for programs. Those are public meetings. They are very lightly attended. They're Those meetings are posted on the Orange County Probation Department's website. They're agendized, the records are public, the ability to attend those are public. And so as they go through that meeting, they have a public comment section to those meetings, and consistently hearing from members of the public that say, you need to start thinking about these alternatives to incarceration and some of these types of programs. The leaders of the county specific to the issue of AB 109 are attending those meetings, or their representatives are attending those meetings. And so it's important for them to hear that we're doing those sorts of things.
I think the biggest thing that you're talking about is awareness, but how do we know that's going on? The only way we're going to find out is if we're knowledgeable about all those websites that are announcing those meetings. I think of one just recently when the Board of Supervisors was considering something that the Sheriff Hutching was bringing about 200 of the inmates who she had handpicked, I think, regarding being nonviolent criminals, and a plan to send them home with a ankle bracelet.
Yes.
And one supervisor presented it. It was not seconded, so therefore the whole thing went down the hole. And I think of 200 families that might have been able to have their loved ones home because these were nonviolent. And I think we as a group, at least as I consider us, that may be not quite right now as important or as big as we'd like to be, but if we had known, we could have been there at that as supporting her agenda there.
Well, I'll tell you, when we first went down the road of doing that, we didn't anticipate being rejected. Behind closed doors, we had been told, hey, this makes sense. But again, June is coming and the elections are coming, and the night before is when we first started to get a sense that, okay, some people are changing course on us. When we went to the Board of Supervisors for misdemeanor electronic monitoring, there was no pushback. It was voted on by the entire board, they supported it, and we headed down the same path and followed the same protocol, and suddenly realized, there are a few things beyond our control. I don't know that any campaign of trying to push this through at the time that we did, if anything, we probably failed to recognize the political landscape when we moved forward with it. We've heard some feedback that, post-election, maybe this is something you can bring back, and we might support. And so, probably a failure on public relations on our part. But again, this is something that we will sometimes put out through the media. Sal Hernandez from the Orange County Register will do several things. I meet with him periodically, and we go over some of our criminal justice and jail needs, and Sean Emery from the Register as well. And so a lot of this gets put out, it just doesn't catch people's attention in the media.
So maybe if we contacted those people on the Orange County Register and had them talk.
I'm not going to suggest you do
All
that.
right, I'm suggesting that we do that. I'll suggest. Dan?
I'd like to go back to the undocumented population you have in jails. I'm Jan Messon, I'm with the Friends of Orange County Detainees.
Yes.
And we visit undocumented people in the Orange County jails. And we haven't really found that they're treated better than the prisoners and inmates because they don't have a right to work, and they don't have a right to take classes, and they don't have a right for a sentence. And this is not really your responsibility. I know they're under ICE custody, so that's probably who I should be talking with more. But that's not really my question, though. I just wanted to bring that up. They also don't have a right to a free attorney, things like that. And if they did commit a crime, which a lot of them did, they've served out the time, so they're really not criminals now. They're there because they don't have papers. So one of our things is just to end their isolation. A lot of times their families are far away, but they're not really criminals, and we keep telling them that, but they are in jail. So the question I have, though, is about the Trust Act more. And my understanding is with 287G that allows police and the sheriffs to take people in custody and detain them, or I guess now it's really ICE that detains them. You maybe turn to ICE or something in Los Angeles even. That may even be beyond your control. But the Trust Act supposedly ensures that it's only serious crimes.
No, not serious crimes per se.
It defines the crimes.
It does, but ICE has the ability to hold people for what they believe to be serious offenses, not necessarily criminal offenses. And so sometimes it's, we've seen organized crime figures who are not currently facing a charge that we have in our custody, they've got documented evidence of some of the things that they do. And so, they don't have a crime, but they are absolutely held by immigration. And certainly there's a screening process to that. Now, our deputies are deputized by the federal government under the 287G program to do a screening of a person's immigration status. And in order to do that screening, you have to be deputized. So we do send our folks to training, and we handpick the people who we allow into that program. And it's extensive training that they go through, but at the end of the day, they're being trained to screen, complete the documents, and to operate within immigration law. They then place a flag on that person, but it is ultimately immigration that places the hold on them. And so our deputies are not detaining them. They are simply notifying ICE that we have someone in our custody under criminal case, and if you wish to place a hold on them, here they are. And then ICE will place the hold, and then certainly we have to look at, under the Trust Act, what that person is in custody for. And at the end of their sentence, if they qualify under the Trust Act, we let them go. If ICE wants to pick them up, it is entirely up to them, but we will release them out of the door. Now, they haven't been real happy with us on occasion in doing that. They want some advanced warning on when these people are being released. It's a very dynamic situation. Sometimes somebody, has a very heavy court case. They go into court, the case is dismissed, and by midnight they're out. And so we will release them. And unfortunately or fortunately, and depending on your viewpoint, they will be released back into the community. Now, as far as what we allow our ICE detainees to do while they are housed in our facilities, whatever we do with them has to be approved by ICE. And so we do provide a lot of free access to libraries and other things at the James Music Facility. And when I say they are not treated like inmates, there are a lot stricter guidelines on discipline and other behavioral things. And keeping in mind, certainly there are a lot of folks in there that may have made some mistakes. Their immigration status comes into question. But there are some people in that environment who have been in our jail multiple times and have some behavioral issues. And so we have to have a regimented, to some level, type of housing arrangement, but it is very carefully governed by ICE. They dictate what we can and can't do. We had actually started a system where we were going to pay, and it wasn't much, it was $1 a day for some of our immigration detainees to work in some of our facilities, providing services to other immigration detainees. And I kid you not, the charge was that we were paying illegal immigrants to work, which is against the law. So it's a very complicated and nuanced issue. It is not as simple to define or to solve as you might think. Yeah, we could have been seen as hiring illegal immigrants to do work. And so, it's a challenge.
And they do seem like that music is as good a place as any jail could be. So, and some of them actually have gotten transferred to the private prison up in Adelanto from music, and they wish they could be back at music, actually.
I hear that a lot. In fact, the sheriff was in Washington, D.C., and the director of Homeland Security had no idea she was even in the audience, and actually highlighted the James Music Facility in his presentation. She was stunned.
But of
She had no
course,
idea.
it'd be better if they weren't in any jail. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you about the job application process. Since most of the job applicants have to apply online, do you have facilities for them to apply, training on how to apply online?
We actually have computers.
You do?
Yes, we have computer banks. We teach them how to use computers, some of the more common programs. Now again, we can't have internet access because, trust me, everybody would be signing up for it. But we've had a few issues You know, keep in mind, we're talking about a group of people that aren't always on their best behavior, and they actually started a dating site within the database. And so we would bring male inmates in, use the computer lab, and then they would leave. We would bring female inmates in, and somebody embedded a thing in there, and we found it. And all of a sudden, you know, inmates are writing inmates, and we're wondering, what's the connection? How do these people know each other? They all go to computer lab. So, you know, it's a tricky process, but we do actually have computer labs, and they are taught some base programs in there. It's not enough. In the new facilities that we're building, we're actually designing some bigger rooms with those sorts of things in mind, and we're hoping to get some things donated from some of the larger computer companies to give back to the community and hopefully a tax write-off.
I have a question. Going back to 287G, I'm also part of the Friends of Orange County Detainees program. So I know you explained how it works previous, but I'm wondering what's the incentive in the first place to place those tags and to have those deputies, you know, looking out for immigration status, seeing that they're already serving in sentences?
Well, just a little bit. One of the things that had come up over the years is that, and again, you got to keep in mind, Orange County is a county that has been tough on immigration, is that criminals from other countries are coming into the United States using our resources and committing crimes, and then we let them out and they go and commit those crimes again. And so there was a push to say, no more. If you're going to live in our country, you're coming from another country, you cannot keep coming back to our jails. And so that was really the impetus for that. That was several years ago when Sheriff Mike Corona was in office. I was not at that time of a rank to be in that discussion, so I don't know what the direct discussions were, but the real impetus for it was the fact that we had a criminal element that continued to use our resources, and if we were to deport them to their country of origin, then that would be that country's problem. We would no longer have that burden. And so what it has morphed into is usually not what it starts out as, and so there are differences of opinion over whether or not that program should be in place, and I respect that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say from my experience, what I've seen and what I've studied has been that that's, for me, I feel like more of a misconception of the community and a criminalization of the community that we often hear in the media and everything. But, for example, the person that I'm visiting, he came when he was 9, and he has a daughter here, and now he's facing possible deportation. He has a psychological disorder, so, you know, he self-medicates, has drug use problems. Very minor nonviolent crimes, so I just feel like as the, you know, county police, that it's more maybe a responsibility to the county, like to keep families together, to keep our community together, so like the cooperation between ICE, their goal, I feel like is very different from what would actually be making our community safer, because now his family, you know, is going to help support them, and we see that a lot, so I don't know how you guys kind of balance that.
Well, and you got to remember, you know, we're the Orange County Sheriff's Department. We are not the global arbiter of what happens in our communities. That's a collective effort of the community. I think what you're seeing is, for a long time, you heard, you know, illegal immigrants are the source of all problems across the country. There was a big push in that regard. I think the pendulum has swung the other way. In fact, I just spoke to a reporter from Key. It's an AM channel now, not one of those that you hear often. But the federal government is now looking at reducing the ICE budget and the number of people that they have in custody. And so a lot of this is political, and a lot of it is driven by the loudest voice. And so I think you are seeing a lot of people who share your opinion that are becoming much more vocal, and I think it's having an impact. And so that's probably the bigger solution to that problem. As I mentioned before, we have 2,000 people with open mental health cases in our jail. We are a jail system, but we have become a social system of medical, mental health care, family reunification. And so we are much more than what a jail is. We will never reach a level in solving the problems that you mentioned, because, quite frankly, our primary function is to run the jails, not to solve those social dilemmas. Now, we're a partner in that, but it's going to take a lot more than the Sheriff's Department to solve that.
And if we can go on to the problem with mental illness, Here we are again being penny wise and pound foolish. We are treating the mentally ill in the most expensive way with the fewest results. What, I mean, you said it, 2,000 out of 6.
Well, 1,000 of those are ICE detainees, but yeah, 2,000 of our inmates, so over 30%, yeah.
That's incomprehensible.
It's the 85,000.
And 85, what is it?
85, I think you said $85,000 per person.
No, that was for hepatitis C treatments of our
Okay.
felons.
All right, well, how much would, just to ballpark, do you have any idea what it might cost you?
They say our criminal justice system in the county is about $1 billion when you add in the sheriff's budget along with the district attorney and the public defender and all the other things that we do. I don't know what the entire budget would be. It's a moving target, but I will say there aren't too many places in the community where people are looking to deal with these issues and to actually come up with hard solutions to them. We're at the place where if nobody else wants to do it, they land at our doorstep. And so we are supportive of coming up with some of those solutions. One of the things that you hear a lot about is Laura's Law, which allows for law enforcement agencies and others to actually put people in mental health facilities against their will. Now, when you empower the government to do that, that scares people, because I guarantee you it's not a perfect system, and there may be someone that may be held that maybe it isn't necessarily the best thing for them. And so the fear is litigation for civil rights violations. And so it was enacted and only one county decided to take it up. Orange County is now looking at that. And from a selfish perspective, I would love to see that happen, because what generally happens, there's a cycle to it. We get people treated, we get them medicated, they come in and they are in a very destabilized state. We get them into the routine of being in the jail. They're medicated, they go to treatment, they go to counseling. They get to where they get, as they refer to it, I get normal again. And then they go out into the community. Now, we partner them up with social services and some others to get that ongoing treatment. But once they leave, there is no ability or authority for us to control what they do. And generally speaking, it's that cycle of they don't want to take their medications because they feel like they're less in tune with things, and I think I'm stable now and I can handle it. And then eventually, for a little while, they'll go on just fine, but eventually the demons that they're facing will come back. They go through that behavioral change where they get back into that state of mental illness, and then somewhere along the line, they commit a crime, and the easy solution is put them back in jail and treat them in jail. And so we're trying to break that cycle, but there are very few resources that are funded and available for those sorts of programs. They're starting to grow. And there are grants that are coming in through social services and through Obamacare.
Yes.
Now, that's what we hope to do through Obamacare, is to get people into the resources that they need after they complete their jail sentences and they complete some of the programming in there. But Obamacare is something that, when it was sold, it was a big book and they voted on it overnight and it went into effect, but nobody really looked at the details of it. And so there are a lot of conflicts within that about how to fund these things, what sort of mechanisms are in place to make sure that the providers are getting the funds to pay for these programs. And so all of those things are starting to happen, but until they do, we're faced with the situation.
And we save money. One more thing. There's another thing that we've heard over and over again. I hope you tell me I'm wrong. I hear that people, when they are put out of jail, their sentence is up. You put them out at 1 minute after midnight to save, and that way you get paid for their being in the jail another time. And they're out on the street. Please tell me I'm wrong.
You're mostly wrong. Let me tell you what happens. I do not get a penny more if, the myth is that if I keep them until 1 minute after midnight, I get the extra dollars for that day, even though they've only been in my custody until midnight. Then I hold the door, and as soon as 12:01 hits, I open the door and everybody runs out. I don't get a penny more. In fact, it costs me more money to hang on to our inmates than it does to put them out of our jail. My goal is to have as few people as possible in our jail system because I don't have the money to maintain the services for the inmates that I do have. And so there is no benefit to me to keeping somebody until midnight plus 1 minute. The only exception to that rule is with ICE detainees. If they are in our custody at 12:01, ICE pays us a bed rate for every day that they are in our custody. I don't release ICE detainees. ICE comes and picks them up and takes them to their facilities. So I have no control over when they come and when they go. That's entirely up to ICE. So there is no incentive for me to hold people until midnight. What program I did institute a few months ago is we project out who is going to be getting out of jail in advance. And what we do is we take them by the van load over to the probation department Monday through Friday. And we have a resource center there, and probation has some resources as well. We actually release them in the probation building during the day. Now, we can only do that with people who are convicted of crimes that are non-violent, non-serious, non-sexual offenses. Now, when I first started this program, we took them by the van load, we brought them in. 909 Main Street is where the building is at. And I don't know if you're familiar with that area, but right across the street is the Orange County Performing Arts School. They were not happy with me. I didn't think about that when I did it, and unfortunately, I was letting these folks out at the same time that kids were getting out of school. Scared the bejesus out of the whole community. And so we worked with the city of Santa Ana to modify that, but a huge chunk of our inmates are being released through that process. But keeping in mind, inmates go to court in the morning, they get back from court at 5 or 6 o'clock at night. Orange County is way behind on their computer and their data system, so a lot of things come across as paper from the courts. So the sentencing comes across for an inmate. We have 300 or 400 people a day that go to court. So the court paperwork comes in, we have to check and make sure all of it is in order. It takes several hours. We start processing those people through who the court orders released. They may have served their sentences, they may have been found not guilty, all of those things. We have to get them out by order of the court as quickly as we can. And oftentimes when that paperwork comes in at 6 o'clock at night, it comes in with errors, or a judge doesn't know that somebody has a hold from another county, or the sentence calculations are improperly calculated by a clerk at the court. We have to reach out to the court and make sure that we're not releasing somebody early or in a way that the court didn't intend. And so what happens is the evenings in our inmate records division are very busy. It's a beehive of activity of processing this paperwork, getting these people out of our system, and then moving them out. So people who are released from court that same day, sometimes it does happen late at night, and they are let out as late as midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning. The people that we bring to the resource center, we offer them bus passes, employment things, and a lot of other things. We give some of those things to the folks that get out late at night, but those resources aren't open to them late at night. And so we do allow them to stay in our lobby. We have phone access in there for them to get a ride. There's a taxi service that's right outside there, and obviously not everybody can afford that. But is it a perfect solution? No. Do we benefit by keeping them in jail longer? Absolutely not.
On that happy note, I think we're going to have to end because it's 12 o'clock. We said we wouldn't keep you later, and then we could ask questions after. Did you want to add something to that? Is that what you?
If I could.
Do you mind waiting for a minute while it's because I don't want to.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, because the question had come up with, like, what can we do now to help support what we're doing? And I would invite anyone's participation in, the Orange County Reentry Partnership especially. We act as kind of a community voice, amplifying the voice of whoever participates. Our meetings are typically held up in Santa Ana. The schedule is on the website, ocreentry.com. But we can move the meetings around. So if there were some really interested, committed folks that are in this part of the county or in any part of the county, we can move that meeting around to different places to make it more convenient for travel. Also, if you sign up on the website, you can get kind of our emails that go out. We send a lot of emails out that say, hey, this is coming up at the Board of Supervisor meeting. Do you want to come and say something about it? Or there's this news article that you could speak to. And I don't have to be as sensitive as Steve does to about the whole, raising your pitchfork thing.
Tell him Jeff sent you.
I'm not in that class of needing to worry about it at this time in my life for a moment. But so I could take advantage of the fact that, yes, there are plenty of things that we as citizens can do in terms of having our voice heard at the county, board of supervisor meetings. Myself, I've gone to the podium several times in my career to express my point of view, to educate, to advocate for something. Do it in a really respectful kind of way, making sure that you're coming from a good place and it's not about being negative or confrontational, but just making sure that your voice gets heard. Letter writing, if you're part of any other groups besides coming here, if you're part of any group where there's just a few people together, collecting maybe letters of that group together and then presenting them together to one of the board offices. All the board offices all have staffs, and each staff group has an expert for different topics. So every board of supervisor and every elected person we have has a staffer that's their job, is to know what's going on in the policy area for substance use, criminal justice, public policy, and so forth, or public safety. And that's their job to kind of gather up what's going on in my constituency's opinion around this topic. And so when the elected usually wants to make a decision about something, many times they call their aide in and say, oh, you're my aide on public safety. What's our constituency saying about this? And so I would, if you really are genuine about wanting to try to get to expressing your point of view, that's the magical person to get to, usually, is to get to their staffer and make sure that that staff person knows that this is my point of view. In fact, my next door neighbor's point of view too, and in fact, it's people at my church's point of view too. Here's the letters that go along with it. Those can really, resound. Writing letters to the Orange County Register as a, public comment, and sometimes they get published. There's a lot of different points, a lot of different ways to get our message out. If you're a Facebook user, OCREP, O-C-R-E-P, we have a Facebook page as well, so you can just search for it on Facebook and you can follow it. And we do like news articles every day practically on different things that are going on, and calls to action on things and whatnot. So I hope that helps. I'm not saying come with pitchforks, because I really don't think that's generally a good way to do things anyway. But I think that there are some really handy, powerful ways to make yourself heard when you don't really need one. And it's worked for me in the past.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jeff. I would like to add one last thing, particularly as people get involved in these sorts of things. It's not an easy thing to change. You will hit dead ends, you will have frustrations, and sometimes those frustrations will be with me. I have a lot of competing interests and things that have to be accomplished, and I get approached 100 times a day by people who have very important things that they want to accomplish, and we just can't accomplish each one. Sometimes it's moving piles a little bit at a time, and so when they say the wheels of justice move slowly, they're not kidding, they really do. And so I would ask for your patience with us, with Jeff's OCREP group and others as we try to move forward with this. But I think collectively as a community, we can have a voice, and I would ask you to be that voice. Thank you.
He's given us 2 hours of his time, plus his transportation from where he lives to here. And he's talking about he doesn't have much time. So we're taking this video, we've done a video of this presentation so that it will get out to other people. And you might want to, who's going to have the video, Tiffany?
It's going to be on YouTube, and
It's
there's going to be
on YouTube?
discs.
Hold on.
It's going to be on YouTube, and it's also going to be on discs, and we're going to
We're having it on
distribute
disc.
it out.
We're going to also present it to someone who will help give it out to some of the people in the schools. We'll have them, so some of the young people, because we really do need a lot of young people interested in this. And so, Steve, thank you so much for being here.